Welcome to our weekly call. I'm so excited for today. I can't wait to dig in with Bob and Bob Burnett, specifically of Barefoot Mining. He is what I would consider a sage in this space. One of our members actually introduced him to us, and I'm so excited to promote him to panelist now. Bob, I'm going to bring you on screen with me. Our member and friend Chris Larson, I believe, introduced me via email to Bob some time ago, and I was able to jump on a little pre-call with him, and I was just pleasantly surprised with his depth of knowledge. And so thanks for joining us, man. I'm just humbled that you would spend a few minutes with us and let us ask some fundamental questions of you.
Well, of course, my pleasure. You know, any chance to talk to Bitcoin, any chance to talk about Bitcoin is an exciting opportunity for me. And you know, I know that your group especially, you know, is people of the right mindset. And so anyway, my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So I've got questions all over the map, and just so everybody understands, like Bob's one of those guys that we could talk for 4 hours on a podcast, and at the end of the podcast, we would be mad that it's ending. There's like he specializes in the long form conversation. Obviously, we don't have that format here with our weekly call, but I'm going to do my best to just extract as many gold nuggets from Bob's experience. And our members, Bob, as a reminder, are one of two people. Usually, they bought Bitcoin and Ethereum a couple of years ago. Maybe they don't really have a go forward strategy when they're investing, or they may have never bought anything at all and they're just getting into crypto and Bitcoin and everything. And so That's your audience today. I want to just kind of take us on a question tour based on what I know and about you and what you've told me previously, and just kind of expose some awesome stuff. Specifically, we're going to focus on Bitcoin today. And I would love for you to, I guess, just give the foundational story, obviously the abbreviated one, of you, your tech background, and how you transitioned into Bitcoin, blockchain, the idea. Like, what was your baptism moment? What was that? When was that awakening?
Yeah. Okay, great. Yeah. Well, so my background, I've been in technology for 35 plus years. I got out of school with a degree in computer engineering, went to work for a company called Zenith, which was an old TV brand, but they had a personal computer division very early in the personal computer days, and was blessed by sheer luck to get assigned to a project as a very junior member, but a member nevertheless, of what I would consider to be the first laptop computer ever created. And so that started a 20-year journey in personal computing. That was just one hell of a ride, if I must. You know,
I can't imagine.
You know, to go through that. It culminated, I spent the last handful of years as the chief technology officer at Gateway, which was, those of you who are, let's say, of teenage years or older probably remember Gateway from the 90s and the 2000s. And
oh yeah.
I then did a technology incubator, and eventually in 2017, found my way into this space. And it happened with a phone call with somebody who, actually, you mentioned Ethereum. Well, I am very much a Bitcoin maximalist. I want to say that up front.
Yeah.
But I did start in Ethereum, and I started with a phone call when somebody asked me to design some Ethereum mining equipment for him. And zooming back, I also have a degree in economics, and I've studied Austrian economics kind of as a hobby for the last 20 years as well. Well, after getting this business to design this Ethereum mining equipment, it precipitated me, or was the impetus for me to start a company which we now know as Barefoot Mining, which designed the equipment. And then most of the people that I ended up selling it to were people that wanted us to host it as well. So we ended up setting up several sites to do that. But as I started to get into things more, I originally approached this as a technologist, and then I started to look more at the technology itself, the foundational pieces, the governance, all these sort of aspects, and at the core, the monetary policy. And I realized that Bitcoin was Austrian thought in code, and it blew me away. The beauty and the elegance of Bitcoin's architecture is what money needs. And I would not say I'm a libertarian, but I would have libertarian tendencies, let's say, politically as well. And all these sort of things kind of came together, but at the core of it, it was, hey, I believe that money is the broken money is the biggest problem in the world. And this light bulb went off for me really in 2018. I started in the business in 2017, but in 2018 is when kind of I realized what was going on and the power of what was going on, and said, hey, I need to jump on this, not so much because it's a way for me to make money, that there's nothing wrong with that, but that this is the world's biggest problem, and I'm in a position to do something about it. And so
But now let me, I want to, because you've said several things that I just want to rabbit trail off of. So what is the world's biggest problem? Say that and unpack that real quick.
I believe the world's biggest problem is a broken monetary system.
Great.
And, peeling back that onion one layer is that money, for the lifetime of everybody on this call at least, has been managed exclusively by states.
Yeah.
And the history of money, if you study the history of money going back 5,000 years, what you'll find is that whenever states have the right to control money, and that largely means print money, that privilege gets abused or mismanaged.
Yeah.
So in other words, it always ends in corruption or ineptitude. Always. The world is batting 100%, 1,000% on that. And I believe that we are in the midst of seeing the cracks in that. It's not just a little crack in the dike anymore. I think probably everybody on this call feels it. It's much bigger than that today. But I also believe that a lot of the world's social ills are really monetary problems that are just masked. So I'm not advocating right or left, whichever side of the political aisle you may be on, but I can promise you, whatever problem you think is at the forefront, wealth inequality, unemployment, racism, white privilege, like all these sort of things. I said, I'm not taking a side on any of those. What I'll say is that a broken monetary system is a major piece of that.
Totally. It amplifies those things at minimum.
At a minimum, correct. Yeah. I'll also say things like, and now we're going to dig a little deeper. You stop me, Josh, if I'm going too deep.
No, please.
But there's something called the Triffin dilemma in economics. Okay, and in the basic premise of the Triffin dilemma is that whatever country holds the position of the world's reserve currency must be a net exporter of money and importer of goods. So a net exporter of money and importer of goods. Yeah. So it's because if you think about it, you say, well, if we want all the world to use our money, if we want to be the standard, so when Peru has a debt with Rwanda, if they're going to have that debt in dollars, there has to be a whole bunch of dollars outside of the US. Well, how do those countries get dollars? They have to sell something to us. That's the only way for that to get it. Therefore, we are exporting dollars and importing goods.
Mm.
So when you look at things like, hey, the US has a crumbling manufacturing base, and you'll hear politicians on either side of the aisle pounding their table about what they're going to do to bring jobs back to America. They can't. It's fundamentally flawed because of the Triffin dilemma.
Sounds like a Ponzi scheme.
Well, kind of, but I would view it another way. I think it's a curse. And so the history of being the global reserve currency starts in utopia, because what happens? The strength of your currency is phenomenal, right? And so other countries are trying to sell you their goods. And by the way, they have to do this. Like, they have no choice.
Yeah.
And so will they sell them at profit levels lower than an American company in the same business? Of course they will, because it's the only way for them to get those dollars.
And those roots trace back to Bretton Woods, right? That pressure and that I guess that forcefulness that they don't really have a decision around.
Well, yeah, that was the inflection point. You could make an argument post World War I that was where the transition was. It was completed in Bretton Woods. What you also find out if you study the history of money is that there are 80 to 150 year cycles. Whatever country has held that. Before us, it was the British, the Spanish, the Portuguese, the Dutch, and different
the world
countries.
reserve status, you mean?
The world reserve status, and it always ends. It always ends, and this is why. Robert Triffin, who by the way, Robert Triffin presented this issue to Congress in 1960, and he said, "Boys, we got a problem." And nobody wanted to hear it. Like, he was like, "Hey, I know this has been a great run, really, post Bretton Woods or post World War II. They had a great 15-year run, a massive piece. But like, hey, we got a problem because this thing unwinds.
Yeah.
And when it unwinds, it's ugly." Well, here we are, right? But the problem is, when you hold the world's reserve currency status, you also have massive power that goes with it, right? Massive political power, massive global power.
Yeah.
And we've seen that exercise, right? We can take countries like Russia and North Korea, and we can essentially kick them out of the system. We can seize assets. Because we control not only the world's reserve asset, but we control the whole financial system. And I'm not saying those are good countries, but I come from a perspective that I don't believe that money should ever be used as a control mechanism, a weapon, or censorship tool.
Sure.
Like
you said, because monetary system is usually the root of the problems to begin with. So why use it as the stick? Yeah.
And it's a very convenient stick. People that would argue the other side of the aisle to me would say, well, we prevent wars by not having to do this. And I won't bore your audience today with that, because we can go down a whole rabbit hole, but let's just say I would strongly disagree.
Yeah. Totally.
In part, I'll say this. I'll give one comment on it.
It's great. No, please.
When you have sound money, when you cannot print money, you cannot sustain wars of any significance, right? How do you fund a war?
Totally.
If you can't print money.
Totally.
So the only way to do it is to tax people or borrow. Those are the only two ways. If you can't inflate your way through it, that's typically what's happened in modern history, including World War II and World War I to a great degree. We've inflated our way to create the money to make those wars happen, and those have made the wars longer and more severe. So there's an argument that more people have died in war because of state-controlled money,
totally,
than anything else.
Well, and it's just like it's like a self-feeding fire, a self-fueling fire. And then you get into the whole Eisenhower warning of the military industrial complex, and it all kind of makes sense. And I guess explain what you mean when you say that Bitcoin, you said this earlier, and I want to retrace this. When Bitcoin is, to paraphrase what you said, basically Austrian economics in code.
Yeah.
Explain that to the layman listening, because some people, hey, public schools don't teach Austrian economics.
No, they don't.
Right?
No, they don't.
So
Like I said, I have a degree, minor degree in economics, and it was all Keynesian. So,
yes.
Okay, so I guess we'll start with that. Keynesian.
As briefly as you can.
Yeah. I'll try to be really
pressure.
brief.
Yeah.
So Keynesian thought would essentially say that we need a master to manage the economy. Okay, and they view the economy as kind of a closed system that you can pull levers. Like, you want the economy to heat up, you do one thing. You want the economy to slow down, you do another.
The wizard behind the curtain.
Yes, the wizard behind the curtain. Very simple. And they believe that you fuel the economy through debt. Okay. Austrians are the antithesis. The Austrians say you must have sound money. In essence, money must represent work. So, that's what it is. Money is a representation of your work. We'll get to this later.
Yeah.
And what is work? If I study physics, which I also did, work is energy. Work is a form of, it's energy, right?
Yeah.
Horsepower, for instance, is energy, right? So that's work and work. So the Austrians would also say that an economy is kind of like an organism. It's a living, breathing organism. It can't be controlled. It has free will. And so their criticism of the Austrians would be, well, as you're pulling these levers behind the curtain, you're saying, well, let me print this money to stimulate the economy, that you don't know what the second order and third order effects of that are. Or the unintended consequences, probably is what you'd say.
Yeah.
One, you're looking in the rear view mirror. So that's one thing about economics, right? All you can do is look in the rear view mirror, and you're dry. If you're trying to manage it, yeah, you're looking in the rear view mirror doing it. And secondly, you're going to get it wrong. So you're just going to constantly be in there doing this. As a result of that, as you play with the liquidity in the market, how you issue credit, what interest rates there are, those sorts of things, you, especially when you're printing money, you force a misallocation of capital. And you also you break what's called price discovery.
Yeah.
So what the price of an individual good or service should be becomes messed up.
Like a college education right now.
Well, that would be an example.
Yeah.
And by the way, things like subsidies would fall into that.
Yeah.
Like subsidies for solar energy or for EV cars.
Yeah.
I'm not saying those are bad things.
Of course.
What I'm saying is that those, by subsidizing them or creating tax incentives for them, you are changing the market dynamics. Like, yes, maybe we should be, the panacea of energy production is not solar. Maybe it's anaerobic digestion of biomass.
Yes.
Okay. So, but by incenting new companies to start and people to install solar systems, they're misallocating capital, right? Yeah. And they're also changing the price dynamics. So what is Bitcoin? Okay, Bitcoin has a transparent monetary policy. There's there's only ever going to be 21 million Bitcoin. We, by the way, know exactly how much Bitcoin there is right now. I can pull up something and I can tell you to the Satoshi, to the 1/100 millionth of a Bitcoin, exactly how much Bitcoin exists in the world. And I can tell you probably within the tolerance of a couple of weeks, exactly what's going to happen over the next 120 years.
Yeah.
Exactly how the money supply will change. The only way that that money gets into the system, though, which is through mining, but is through the work of miners. Much like if we were on a gold standard, the only way gold would enter the system is through the work of a gold mining company.
Mm-hmm.
And so, so that part is very Austrian, but the other part that's also Austrian is there's nobody in charge. It lets money live and breathe on its own. So like one of the visualizations I like to give, I did a speech last night here in, I'm in Naples, Florida. I gave a speech. And this is a visualization I used. I said, imagine in your head, a room and a line down the middle. On the left half of the room is all the money in the world right now. All the money in the world. On the right half of the room is all the stuff in the world. All the paintings, all the beer, all the cans of corn, all the stocks, all the other stuff. That's all over there. Okay. So at any point in time, all the money in the world represents all of the stuff in the world. Okay. Now, if Josh, you're feeling real ambitious this morning and you walk out in your backyard, you chop down a tree and you build a beautiful dining room table.
Yeah.
And you go throw that on that pile on the right side. Let's say it's worth $10,000.
Okay.
Okay. If we haven't changed the money on the left, right?
Yeah.
If no new money has entered the system and that's worth $10,000, then by definition, the other things in the pile must have gotten cheaper by $10,000.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because you did not increase the money supply.
Correct.
Yeah.
So what does that prove to us? By the way, we could do a long session on this, but what does it prove to us? It proves to us that the natural state of money is to be deflationary. The term deflation is often associated with very bad things. So, but it's not. It's actually the natural course of money, and we should expect that money is deflationary. And the fact that it's not is a travesty. It is theft. It's theft by the central banks around the world, but number one being the Fed, is stealing that deflationary force. So even when the Fed says, hey, our stated goal is 2% inflation, they're lying, because it's not just 2% inflation. They're stealing, in addition, the natural deflationary forces, which are, by the way, are about 2% as well.
Wow.
So the natural state of deflation is about 2%, meaning, meaning if you hire me, Josh, you want to put a new pool in your backyard, and you hire me to go dig that. Like, so I go out there and I grind away, and you pay me $1,000. I believe it is ethically and morally right that I have the choice of keeping that money and not having any of its value stolen at a minimum. So if I choose to not spend the fruits of my labor instantly, that I don't pay a penalty for that.
Yeah.
That seems morally correct.
Yeah.
Right. So Bitcoin allows that. So a world based on the Bitcoin standard, which we're not at today, but a world with a fixed money supply, you go back to the analogy I gave you, the right and the left side of the room, that pile doesn't get bigger, because the opposite's true too. So in the pile, if if nothing changes on the right-hand side, there are no more goods and services, but we add $1 trillion to the pile on the left side, then by definition, there must be $1 trillion of price inflation somehow amongst that other stuff. Now, some things may still go down, but
Yeah.
by definition, some other things then will go up to offset it. So again, I think these are relatively simple visualizations, but they're not wrong.
No, and they're fundamental, and they're things that we take for granted as retail investors. These facts and these truths that you're talking about are the very things that I want our members to understand, because they're things that we overlook. You know, like you said, we grew up in this monetary system, and the driver is looking in the rearview mirror, and it's the Federal Reserve. Like, they're the person, they're the driver trying to make forward decisions by looking at the past data that you're talking about. So here's my question. Like, the thing that I struggle with is, and it's because of, I may mispronounce his name, Saifedean Amos, the author of Bitcoin.
Saifedean Amos.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So he says that money does not money desires to be singular. And he's speaking of global money, you know, yeah. And I start looking at obviously what's happening with the US dollar. I start looking at the BRICS nations.
Yep.
You know, in February, whenever Biden put sanctions on Russia and they went to the gold standard, you know, like I feel like there's been a lot of people say that was the Maginot Line. Like, that was the moment when that was another inflection point.
Yeah.
I don't understand why can you simply explain to me why the world economy cannot proceed with multiple currencies? Like, what if the US was what if the US, Mexico, and South America were on the Bitcoin standard? What if Asia was on whatever, and what if there was a third currency? What happens in that environment?
Okay. What I would say is, I mean, I think it's still okay for an individual country to have a currency, but I'm distinguishing that from money.
Yeah.
The distinction between currency and money. So I think the US dollar can exist, the Mexican peso can exist, the Russian ruble can exist. But what are they backed by? You know, there's this famous line from Nixon when he took us off of the gold standard, and he says, you know, you have the full faith and trust of the U.S. government.
I heard it all my life growing up.
What a line of bullshit. I mean, what a terrible human being.
Here we are.
Yeah, here we are. Yeah. So I think you can have that, but they need to be backed by something that people have confidence in. And by people, I also mean other countries.
Yeah.
So, on the gold standard, that's what we had. In other words, what would happen if you wind back the clock to a true gold standard period, let's say early 18th century, if you had, I don't know, what was it called? A kroner, and you had a Spanish bullion.
Yeah.
You could go to either country and use them.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, you could use them because they knew exactly what their weight in
gold was. Yeah.
What their weight in gold was, and you could use them, and people knew that. But here's an interesting thing. The word coin. So coin is actually a verb. So it started as a verb, it became a noun.
Wow.
Okay. So to coin something, the verb came from a couple thousand years ago, when what was happening was precious metals were used as money, but people couldn't trust that item.
Yeah.
Okay. So governments came in, the role of government and money was not to create the money, but to endorse the money. So to coin something meant that the Roman Empire authenticated that this coin, what we now know as a coin, was valid. So they coined it. And so that was the original role of government and money, was to be the authenticator of the money.
Okay. Yeah, that makes total sense.
And so so again, that's why in the, like, say, if we wound the clock back 200 years, most gold coins that were coined by a sovereign nation were completely interchangeable. Now, I want to be conscious of our time here. We're getting back to the Triffin dilemma a little bit.
Sure.
So what's happened is, I believe, I'm trying not to be too political, but I would say that a massive mistake was made by Biden by kicking Russia out of the monetary system and seizing assets. Because what he did, he may have won the battle, but he lost the war.
Just the geopolitical mistake that it is.
Well,
I guess
it's even bigger than that.
Okay.
Because here's what it says. And I may have mentioned this to you, Josh. I've done a little work with the El Salvadorian government.
Yeah, I wanted you to talk about that. Please dig into that.
So why is Bitcoin legal tender in El Salvador? Why would they?
And what does legal tender mean? Because there's money, currency, legal tender. Like, I want us all to make sure we have categories, because when you said money and currency are different, for me, that says, to the critic of Bitcoin who says, yeah, but you can't buy coffee with Bitcoin. I can now go, yeah, but you can have currency to buy the coffee, but the currency's can be backed by the value of Bitcoin.
Yeah.
That the money is the Bitcoin, the currency can be whatever. So what is then legal tender?
Okay. Well, legal tender is a form of payment that must be accepted.
Okay.
In a given jurisdiction.
So you can't segregate against it if someone wants to pay with it.
Correct.
Got it. Understood.
But I'll play a little game, a little version of Jeopardy with you, Josh.
Yeah.
So do you know what an expression of central bank liability is?
I cannot intelligently answer that question.
Okay. That is how central banks define money.
Money, of course.
An expression of central bank liability.
It's terrible.
Okay. Which means it's debt, by the way. It means it's the debt of a central bank. Okay. So that's how in the modern era they define money. So you wonder, why does the general public not understand money? Well, let's start right there. Like, how many people can really extract that and put your hands on it? Well, you'll be driving around. What the hell does that actually mean? Like, like, how did that get created? Well, what it means is there was no work associated with the money. Let's keep it real simple. Yeah. Nobody worked to create that money. It was created out of thin air. You hear that shit.
Yeah.
Sometimes. I'm sorry, cussed. I don't.
It's fine. You're safe.
So the world. So we'll go to El Salvador.
Oh yeah.
So imagine. We'll just kind of the order of events isn't exactly right here, but let's say you're El Salvador, a small country, 6.5 million people in Central America.
Yeah.
You're not really a friend or a foe of the US. You don't hold a privileged status. You're not Canada.
Yeah.
You're not an enemy at this point either.
Yeah.
And you see that the US government and essentially all the Western powers decide Russia is evil. And maybe they are, by the way, but they decide Russia is evil. And as a penalty for being evil, we're going to seize your assets And by the way, we're going to make our system unavailable to you. You can no longer do commerce through our monetary network because there's money and there's monetary networks.
Yeah.
We're taking your money and we are preventing you from using the monetary network.
Yeah.
No, you're El Salvador, 6.5 million people. You don't have any military force. You have very little economic power.
Sure.
But you're the leader of this country, and you say, well, my responsibility is to maintain sovereignty and create a safe environment for my 6.5 million people. If literally with the stroke of a pen, a guy sitting in Washington, D.C. can essentially steal the wealth of my nation and make it impossible for my nation to do commerce globally, what the hell am I going to do?
Yeah.
So how many, there's 100, and it depends on how you count it, right? There's 183 countries in the world, right?
Yeah.
There's probably 15, 18 that consider themselves part of the system. Most of the Western European countries, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, US, all those countries feel very secure.
Yeah.
They're in a privileged position within this monetary network.
They're at the table. Yeah.
They're at the table. BRICS, which is what you're referring to, is an attempt to create a different commodity-backed international standard.
Yeah.
Kind of gold standard-ish.
Right.
For those of you who have read on monetary history, it's kind of a attempt to recreate the Bancor, which was what, ironically, Keynes, John Maynard Keynes, proposed at Bretton Woods and got shot down. They're trying to recreate that so that if any of them get canceled from the other system, they have a mechanism by which they can do trade.
Yeah.
And there are countries, by that, I mean, there are countries like South Africa, for instance, that are part of that. Probably a country you wouldn't think of. Sure. I mean, obviously, the some of the players like Iran and Russia are obvious players in this.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
when you get people like South Africa in, that's kind of their play. Now, what El Salvador did, though, El Salvador went to Bitcoin. The Central African Republic also went to Bitcoin. So we have two countries.
Yep.
Said, you know what? We are now going to start holding in the treasury of our country. We're going to hold Bitcoin, and we're going to create legal tender status within the country to try to start creating a mechanism by which Bitcoin is utilized. Because, by the way, if that happens and ultimately wages start getting paid and commerce starts happening, then tax collection will occur, and we'll also build Bitcoin in our sovereign treasury.
Yeah.
That way. So that's what's going on. And so whether the winner is BRICS, whether the winner is Bitcoin or some combination of these things, the world is rejecting the US status. And like I said, I think that I don't believe that money should ever be used as a weapon.
Yeah.
Or as a control tool, which we could talk about CBDCs and things like that if you want to, but yeah. It's not meant to do that. It's meant to represent your work.
Yeah.
And it's not meant to be a policing policy. Like, for instance, even here in the US, the banking system has taken on a role of surveillance and policing.
Yeah.
Canada, when the trucker problem happened, during the COVID crisis, they without a judge or a jury just would seize people's assets and lock them out. The banking system, a component of the banking system, has become part of a police force, a state-controlled police force, and I believe that's morally wrong. So part of my passion for Bitcoin, getting back to that, is It can't be controlled by any of those things.
Yeah.
And if I was the leader of El Salvador, I would 100% understand why I would want at least some piece of my economic engine and my country's treasury to be in Bitcoin, because hey, it's my safety valve. That's my insurance policy.
Yeah, I would love your thoughts on this real quick, and then I want to conclude our conversation with Bitcoin mining specifically as a business effort. So here in Alabama, where I live, I'm on a little grassroots mission of my own, meeting with legislators, state treasurers, et cetera. We just got our state auditor elected, who is a Bitcoiner. I want the state of Alabama to do what El Salvador is doing, because we live in a republic, et cetera. We have all this surplus in Alabama that no one knows about. And yet we're building, buildings, and we have a terrible prison system. And there's like all these flaws, again, monetary abuse problems in our state. When I sit down with Congress people in our state, my thing is like, hey, the governor made that decision because she got $2 billion from Washington, D.C. last year. You know that. And then they're like, yeah, but she also, passes our laws. So like that level, when I see on Twitter, Bitcoin fixes that.
Yeah.
These are great examples of real life infrastructures that can be, I guess, the balm over the wounds of our society, political structures, monetary systems. Very much I can see could be Bitcoin. So what was I know you had a consultative relationship with El Salvador. Like, what was that experience like? What did you experience when you did that?
Yeah. I don't want to overstate my role, because there were many people who played a much, much bigger role than me in this. But essentially, here's what happened. There's a big conference called Bitcoin 2021, which was held in Miami.
Yeah.
And at that conference, the leader of El Salvador, President Bukele, made an announcement that Bitcoin would become legal tender in El Salvador. And he announced that would occur later in the year. It would legislatively be enacted. And the roots of that, by the way, were that there's an area in El Salvador called Bitcoin Beach, which is a small community of relatively poor community.
Wow.
Of street vendors, and it's a surfing village. And if you go there, I've been there. People are selling bracelets and mangoes and ice cream bars and whatever. And when you're kind of down there hanging at the beach, you can buy stuff. And they had a big problem because they're largely unbanked.
Yeah.
Meaning these are not people with bank accounts. They couldn't take credit cards. They can't afford to take
which is an indication of systemic poverty usually.
Yep. And by the way, a different vector of this, there's somewhere between 1.5 and 1.8 billion unbanked adults in the world.
Yeah.
And most of them cannot get a bank account because they can't produce the proper ID, or they can't meet the minimum balance levels. And essentially that means they are excluded from participating in the global economic community. It forces them into a very localized thing, and they can't break out of that, right? And for all the bullshit that comes from these G20 conferences and the World Economic Foundation, all that, they're not doing jack shit to try to help those people.
Yeah.
What does Bitcoin do? Bitcoin means that any of those people which have a phone, and by the way, majority of them have a phone, can create a wallet with no balance and start selling mangoes for Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And start accepting payments. And the moment they get that first customer, they now have a form of money that connects them to the whole world.
Yeah.
And they can spend that money however they want. They can also receive money. If you're a guy that weaves rugs, you now a way that you can put that rug on eBay or some sort of eBay actually doesn't accept
marketplace. Yeah.
Some marketplace, and you can say, hey, you can tell a guy in Alabama, you like my rug? Great. Send me 200,000 Satoshis and I'll send you the rug, right? It connects these people to the world. So, let's say Bitcoin is freedom. Yeah. So anyway, getting back to El Salvador, they make the announcement. The next day, I got a message through Twitter from a member of the El Salvadorian embassy here in Washington, and he said, "Hey, can you come up to Washington and meet with us about Bitcoin?" And so I thought, well, that's kind of cool. I'm kind of honored to do that. So okay, so I hopped on a plane the next day. I went to Washington and I met with Ambassador Mayorga, kind of her right-hand man, a guy named Mardo Tochez, and basically in El Salvador, this initiative was being led by the president.
Yeah.
And a lot of people, like for instance, the embassy here, they didn't know anything. Wow. So it started with, they knew Bitcoin, but they didn't know anything. So I really spent the day with them from the ground up.
Doing what we've done today on a way more fundamental level.
On a different scale, yeah. And then I guess it went well, and they said, hey, can you come to El Salvador?
Yeah.
And so they were making a trip to El Salvador a few weeks later. So my wife and I hopped on a plane. We went to El Salvador. This was about 6 weeks before. We went a little deeper. Obviously, the country was coming up very rapidly. We met with several members of the government about issues that they may be facing. I gave them some consultation. We started talking about the possibility of mining in the country, which I know you want to talk about here in a second. And then I went back a few months after that to again meet with them, and kept continual conversation with them throughout. They're doing very well. The mass media, by the way, has been extremely critical of it, because what they did is they said, hey, these guys bought a certain amount of Bitcoin, and it's now worth, I don't know, X millions of dollars less.
Yeah, right.
But here's a few economic things. Tourism is up phenomenally since they started. And they've generated 10 times more money from tourism than the paper value of the loss.
Sure. The unrealized loss.
Yes. It's unrealized loss, correct. Because, by the way, what we're doing is we're trying to force them to measure the value of the Bitcoin in dollars. I know that sounds funny, but they're not. Their legal tender is Bitcoin. They measure it in Bitcoin.
There's going to be a point where we're like, wait, no, Bitcoin, I don't care how much dollars it's worth. Right. It's a Bitcoin.
Right. So yeah, we have a flawed form of money. We have a flawed monetary system. And then we're trying to force the benchmark upon which we measure Bitcoin and other things, by the way, against a flawed monetary system. Yeah. It makes no sense. I'm 5'9". I'm 58 years old. When I was 30 years old, I was 5'9". When I was 16 years old, I was 5'9". Those 5'9s were exactly the same thing.
Yes.
And you know why? Because we have an international standard for the measurement of length. When I was 16 years old, if I have $100, that means something completely different than the 100 at 30 and the 100 at 58.
Yeah.
Why is it that we as a society accept what I would argue is the most important thing we measure, which is the value of our work?
Yes.
On a standard that moves every freaking day. And it's controlled by a third party. Why do we accept that?
Yeah, that's the game changer. All right, so real quick, why mine? Why would a retail investor maybe listening to this talk or interview, Why would they be enchanted with, attracted to, have a desire to be a Bitcoin miner?
Yeah. Okay. So Bitcoin mining, for anybody that doesn't know it's essentially the infrastructure by which the Bitcoin network operates.
Mm-hmm.
So if I want to send 1 Bitcoin to Josh, you could think of it, if we were thinking in terms of, let's say, a credit card. The moment I initiate that transaction, it goes into what's called the mempool, and you think of it as a pending transaction.
Yeah.
It says if you're sitting at the 7-Eleven and you've swept your credit card and you're in that state where it hasn't been approved yet, that's the mempool.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, the miners of the world, there are a couple million mining machines in the world. They technically, I'll try to just keep it simple. Technically, each individual miner can look at all of the transactions in the mempool
Mm-hmm.
and pick which ones it wants to try to process.
Mm.
It's not first come, first serve. We don't have time to go into the details of it, but let's just say
Yeah.
being a miner gives you a privileged position in selecting the transactions that are going to get processed. Now,
Yeah.
most people just set the default and they go and they don't worry about it, but you have that privilege. Assuming you find what's called the block, you solve the block. Okay, you're chasing an algorithm, trying to what's called hash the block and come up with a certain numeric result of that hash. If you win the block or you're on a team that's part of winning the block, which is how most people operate, they're called pools, then you get a reward.
Mm.
And that reward is 6.25 Bitcoin plus whatever fees are embedded in that. Right now, we're averaging about 6.5 Bitcoin per block.
Okay.
Approximately every 10 minutes, a block is processed, and each is an independent chance to win some of that money. Mathematically, if, for instance, you own 1% of the world's computing power, I would say, if you just looked at a course of a week, I could essentially guarantee that you'll get 1% of the world's block, what are called the block rewards. So what does that mean? That means that if you're a miner, you are going to get paid in Bitcoin essentially every single day.
Yeah.
So if you're looking at like passive income is a very hot word, right? Well, you're gonna generate passive income, and you're gonna get it in Bitcoin, not in dollars.
Was it more lucrative to start mining sooner than later?
Oh yes, it was.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean it still can't be lucrative.
Sure.
And when we set up mining operations, whether they're people come in as investors or they mine, they just buy their own equipment and we help them run it, you get a lot of the same privileges. You get the bonus depreciation. You get a lot of that stuff up front.
Yeah.
But
you're talking about the hardware depreciation from a tax perspective. Yeah.
Right. So you start with that. When you generate the Bitcoin, another way to think of it is you could set up some sort of fancy dollar cost averaging strategy.
Yeah.
To buy Bitcoin.
Yeah.
But mining, and mining, if you configure your system the right way and you join the right kind of pool, you actually can get paid every 10 minutes.
Oh, wow. Fantastic.
You can be dollar cost averaging into Bitcoin in a way that accumulates a little bit of Bitcoin every 10 minutes.
Got it.
So, that's a phenomenal thing. The other thing is this, it's in Bitcoin, how much, if there's X amount of computing power in the world, and I give this example, and you own 1%, historically, if the price of Bitcoin falls a lot, then people who have older technology turn off their machines. Therefore, if you had 1% before, when they turn off their machines because the price goes down, but you get more Bitcoin.
Sure.
Because now you don't have 1%, maybe you have 1.1% because some of the people turned off. So it has this kind of historically, I can't guarantee it, but it kind of has this self-insulating thing where this happens.
Almost like a sliding scale on some level.
Yeah, kind of like that.
So what's the best way? Couple minutes left. What's the best way for a retail investor to get involved in Bitcoin mining? Like, is barefoot mining a good vendor for the retail individual investor? Like, what are the avenues or channels that they could pursue?
Okay, so we certainly are one of them. I don't want to there are several places where you can go and you could get hosted computing services. Do not do what's called cloud mining. Okay, so we don't have time for it, but let's just say this: do not do cloud mining.
Great, that's what I want to know.
Number one, do not do cloud mining. We would be happy to talk with somebody if they're interested in being a retail miner. If you want to do it yourself, we can sell you some equipment. You want to be a person of a certain technical aptitude and to do it because it's not easy. If you want, we can buy the equipment for you and host it. The minimum investments for that is probably on the order of $6,000 or $7,000. You can get going. We also do, if you want to, what we do is much like, I'm sure a lot of your folks are familiar with real estate. When we set up new sites, so that's called a hosted solution. Basically, you own the equipment, you pay us a monthly fee to run it for you, which includes the electricity and the management and all that. You get all the Bitcoin. We don't touch your Bitcoin. It goes directly. Second way is more for like accredited investor type people. If you want to invest in a new mining operation, we set up operations where maybe we'll go raise some money. We'll get 200-300 servers. My company, Barefoot Mining, will operate it. We'll take a GP position in it, and we'll let other people come in as LPs. So those are kind of the two different ways you can get in. And we pay, same sort of thing though. We pay in Bitcoin. So that's
awesome.
Yeah.
So how can we find you? What's the best place to go? Is it barefootmining.com? Is it Twitter? How do my members engage with you if they want to do business with you?
You can email me, bob.burnett@barefootmining.com. Burnett is Burnett. Follow me on Twitter if you're interested in this subject. I'm pretty active in the Bitcoin community. And that's boomer_BTC on Twitter. And then barefootmining.com. You'll find us there. I also, those that like deep dives, as you mentioned, Josh, I do have a podcast called Mind Your Business as well. And it's as you said, it's for those looking for something to listen to on a Saturday afternoon when you're doing your chores, because I think my shortest one is about 90 minutes, and they're often in the order of 3 hours. So
I could do this, no joke, with you once a week for 4 hours. I loved it. I'm honored that you would spend time with us. Your time is valuable. Your experience is priceless, and we don't take your time for granted. So thank you so much.
Well, pleasure to be here, Josh. Thank you. I just saw a little question. I am set up in the US. We are a South Dakota company.
All right. Well, thank you guys. We've got to run. Bob, this is awesome. It's going to be so helpful for my members. There's about 226 of them. So honored that you would let us share your knowledge. And I owe you one. We'll talk soon.
Oh, you don't owe me anything, but thanks, folks.
All right.
Take care.
See you, man.